Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we are chatting with podcast host and paranormal author Eve Evans. Eve has written over 20 chilling anthologies of paranormal eyewitness accounts. Her books recount paranormal tales of shadow people, haunted objects, terrifying places, and stories of everyday people coming face to face with the supernatural, paranormal, and high strangeness. You can find her books on Amazon and at eveevansbooks.net. Eve is also the host of Forever Haunted Podcast, The Ghost That Haunts Me with Eve Evans, a truly haunted podcast, and Bone Chilling Tales That Keep You Awake podcast. You can also find her on her YouTube channel, Bone Chilling Tales. Hey Eve, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you are a busy woman.
Yes, I do many things.
lots of books there, and then with all the different podcasts and your YouTube channel, a lot going on. So I always like to know how everybody got into the paranormal, especially as deep into the paranormal as you are. So how did you get into the paranormal to come to write the books and start the podcast and the YouTube channel?
Well, I'm actually writing a memoir about all of that because I feel like it's a whole book worth. But honestly, my whole life, I've been sensitive. I'm not a psychic. I don't say that. And I'm not saying I don't believe in psychics because I have some friends that say they're psychic. And I really think that they can do amazing things. But I am not psychic. But towards paranormal things, I tend to be sensitive. And what I've learned as of 2 years ago is that I am what's called an empath. And I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah, I happen to be an empath as well.
Nice. I'm learning so much about empathy lately. Awesome. So I lived in a house growing up that my parents built from scratch. And it was huge. It was like 6 bedrooms. It had to be, I don't know, because I didn't know the exact square foot growing up, but it had to be like 4,500 square feet. And I would have feelings and reoccurring nightmares and feel like things were watching me all the time. I even saw a couple apparitions in the house, and I just kept telling myself, it can't be haunted because they built it. So no one died in here or anything. But now that I'm older, I'm starting to realize, well, the land could have been haunted. Like, right. Who knows what happened on the land? So I'm more open to that being a possibility. But obviously, since it was my childhood, I don't remember everything like with clarity. So I can't for sure say that house was haunted, just that there was a lot of things that happened in that house that I can't explain. And as an adult, I moved in with my first husband. My parents own houses and rent them out. And I was helping my dad renovate this house. And I was in the basement and I was trying to get, so my dad is kind of like I call him a Jimmy rigger because that's like the language from his time, but he Jimmy rigs everything. So he put like a layer of carpet down and then like just glued another layer of carpet over it instead of like removing it like you're supposed to. So I was taking a shovel and I was trying to shovel off some of the carpet because it was so on there and it was like a concrete floor. Well, he went out to lunch and then the lady who rented before came downstairs and kind of freaked me out because I didn't know anybody else was in the house. But she goes, so have you seen any ghosts yet? And I was like, what? But she's with her 4-year-old daughter. And I was like, who says that in front of their like little kid, you know?
Right.
So I'm in the basement, which is a large family room. And then there's like an under the stairs storage that's not finished on the inside at all. So it's kind of creepy. And she goes, there's a guy that comes out of there that wears chains. And I just thought that was so stupid because I'm like, that's like a Mickey Mouse cartoon ghost, right?
Right.
So
right.
I just totally brushed it off as silly and the lady was kind of crazy. Then my hubby and I, before we got married, decided to move into the house because we liked how big it was. And I found out I was pregnant. So we moved into the house, not really thinking it was really haunted because, you know, crazy lady. So the first thing that happened in that house, I was sleeping and I had a dream that this girl with wet hair that was obviously dead, probably around 18 years old, came down from the attic, which is at the the end of the hall from our room and walked down the attic into my room, and I could watch myself sleep as she watched me sleep, which it wasn't like terrifying, but it freaked me out because I've never had a dream like that before.
Yeah.
So I woke up and went to get water, and the attic door was wide open. And I was like, okay, we haven't been up there since we moved in. So that really freaked me out. Another occurrence was I was taking a nap. My daughter was a year and a half old, and I had the door shut, and there was like a cop knock on the bedroom door that shook the door. I was like, okay. So I went outside in the hallway. Obviously, no one else is home but me and her, and obviously no one was there. So I thought, well, okay, maybe it was a cop and it was banging so loud on the front door, it just shook the bedroom door. So I went out front and there was no one. And I actually did a whole entire lap around the house in case some weirdo was like hiding in the backyard, and no one. And then went back to sleep. Just as I was dozing off, it did it again. So after like 3 or 4 times of that, I finally left the bedroom door ajar, and it never did it again. Which was really odd. It was like whatever it was did not want me to shut my bedroom door while we took a nap. So there was a couple more at that house. They were very, very spaced out and not super huge, but I did have a night terror there with the old hag screaming in my face that caused me to I don't like to sleep with the lights completely off anymore since that. But that house was kind of what got me a little bit started in it, at least watching the TV shows like Ghost Hunters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the next house was way worse that I lived. So I got divorced and I got remarried, and that house was really bad. Like I had to get medicated because I wasn't sleeping or eating, and I was just terrified all the time. So that's kind of what started it. I moved out of that house and we bought a house which did not have any ghosts in it. And I started interviewing a bunch of people because I wanted answers. Like I felt like this house, my second house, traumatized me really badly. And I was like, I want to know why these things happened to me. Like, what was it? How does this happen? And then I just was like, oh, I kind of want to publish some of these. And I asked permission to publish them because I wanted other people to know that they're not alone too.
Right.
Because I kind of wish I had that when I was living in the second house. So that's kind of what started everything for me. And then I started ghost hunting a little bit with my husband, and then COVID happened. So we haven't been able to do a whole lot, but we have a huge bucket list of things we want to do.
Yeah. And did you ever find out any of the history behind the houses that you lived in that were haunted?
I did not look them up. I know the first one was built in the 40s. So that one probably had quite a lot of history. And the second one was fairly newer, which totally took me for a loop because it had to be, we moved in like 2008, like right before the market crash thing happened. And that one had to be built in the early 2000s. So it wasn't really old enough to have a history. And
right.
So that kind of messes me too. Is you're like, I don't know how to explain this. This house is like 5 years old. Like, why is this happening? So yeah, I will have to look. But we did drive by our old, like the second haunted house in April of last year. And I did a video on Instagram for it because I haven't seen it since then. I do know a French family moved into it. And I have wanted to go to the front door and be like, so is this place still haunted? But I don't want to be that crazy lady from the first haunted house, you know?
Yeah. I think it would be worth going and asking them and just, I mean, it'd be kind of out of the blue and kind of weird for them, but at least you could get, if they did tell you anything, you could get some sort of validation.
Yeah, that's true. I think part of it was that I just have so much anxiety about that house. Like, I don't want to say it caused me PTSD, but sort of. Like, I've actually worked on it in counseling. I know that sounds crazy. And I don't mind saying that. I went to counseling because I wanted to get healthy after living in this house that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have lived in those situations that have caused them to kind of have issues afterwards and some sort of PTSD, like you were saying. Because, like for me, I've been a paranormal researcher and investigator for 20 years, so I'm kind of used to the paranormal stuff. And
Yeah.
but for somebody who's not, to be going through that and to be terrorized by it, and it's something that you can't see and you can't do anything about, I think there's a very real mental health aspect to that, of it kind of driving you crazy.
Yeah, well, it was a rough year. My biological dad killed himself at the beginning of that year, and then my mom passed away from an unknown illness at the end of that year. So it wasn't just the house, like I was kind of processing. It was a lot for 1 year, you know. I have like really a bad taste in my mouth about that house because it happened during, crazy time in my life too. So
Right.
what do you investigate?
So I've investigated lots of different places. I started out as a teenager before all the TV shows and all that stuff, before ghost hunting was a thing, where people still look at you when, like you were crazy and needed to be put somewhere, because I was diving into all of that stuff. And I started having experiences when I was 8 years old. In my own house, I woke up out of a dead sleep and saw a figure standing in the doorway. And it was kind of, it was a woman kind of glowing, and I jumped up and slammed the door and flipped the light on. And so it kind of, it snowballed from there. And then I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather died when I was 14. And I think that really just kind of ramped up my interest in the paranormal and trying to figure out if there's something beyond us and where we go when we die and that type of stuff. Because we started, once my grandfather passed away, me and my mom, my grandmother, started having more stuff happen in our house, and noises, and the TV would turn off and on by itself, and we would hear tools moving, like the clanking of metal together in the garage, like somebody was rummaging through the tools, and stuff like that, and seeing shadows in the house. And then when I started going out ghost hunting, and I've told the story a few times, but we would sneak into this place called Carton Plantation in Franklin, Tennessee. I live in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville. And we would sneak on this property, and it was trespassing. I don't condone that. And that's where I kind of got my start. Me and a few of my friends would go. I found some other like-minded people. It's just kind of snowballed from there, and I've kind of dove headfirst into researching the paranormal and investigating all different kinds of locations. And so, yeah, it's just kind of snowballed over the years. And
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. After you have like a lot of experiences you can't explain, you want answers, but at the same time, you kind of want to be like your own sleuth, trying to figure out whatever you can. I totally get that.
And then also being an empath, I wanted to understand that a little more. And so I've kind of, I've come to terms with that over the years too, because I kind of describe it like being a lighthouse in the dark.
Yeah.
Things are kind of attracted to you. And so I think part of the paranormal experiences that I've had in my own house have been because of that as well. I've kind of attracted some of that, because it's like, oh, there's somebody who can somewhat, sense me or see me, or, that type of stuff. So I think maybe that would explain some of the stuff that you had go on, that the houses weren't necessarily haunted, but maybe you were a little bit, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think they flock to me. I definitely do. I've EVP'd in my current house, which is also haunted. I guess I have days. Depends on how active it is, but usually it's pretty chill, but I can get EVPs. I actually think my biological dad, who killed himself, is here, because I've caught EVPs of him saying that he's here. So that makes me feel a little bit better that I think there's definitely more than one here. There's probably like 3, maybe more, but it makes me feel better that he's here. I don't know, because I've asked questions and I got, hey, hi, I'm here. And it's kind of creepy because it sounds just like him. So, and then I've asked other questions, and I have an EVP where something, it kind of sounds like Dan, but I'm not sure. But it says it followed you here. And so I'm wondering if something followed me from the second house or the first, because I had a lot of banging in the second house. It wasn't on the bedroom door, but it was on the wall. And it was so loud, like a cop knock, that it shook our bed. And so I'm wondering if whatever entity that was followed us to the other house, but instead of banging on the door, it banged on the wall.
Yeah.
So I've wondered if things follow me. But yeah, I totally get that. With being empaths, I think we are kind of like they just know that we can sense them. And I can't, well, that's not true. I have seen apparitions and shadows and stuff, but not typically. More so, I feel them. I feel their presence than, see lots of things.
Yeah, that's kind of how I am. Like I can read even living people's energy really, really well. I know in the first 30 seconds I meet somebody whether I like them or not. And it's not anything, it's not judging anything they've done or said, but I found out just through years of paying attention that in the first 30 seconds if my body tells me that it doesn't like somebody, I'll find out. It might be a year down the road, but I'll find out that they're not a good person for some reason.
I totally get that.
Also, the whole thing of just knowing things that you shouldn't know before they
Right?
happen, or yeah.
It's creepy. And I'm kind of like a lie detector. So I know when my husband's lying to me, which I'm going to be honest, he does not do that often. But when he does, I just am so good at reading like facial expressions, body language, and then I just have that whole body feeling too. I just know. And it kind of peeves him off. Like I'm like, are you? Because he'll be like, just as simple as like, oh yeah, I'm fine. And I'm like, you're not fine. And he's like, yeah, I am. I'm completely normal right now. I'm like, no, you're not. I can just tell. And he's like, stop doing that. And I'm like, okay. He's like, I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I'm like, okay, fine. But yeah, or I tell this story often because it's one of the biggest, well, actually I have two really big things. First off, my whole life, I have been sensitive, obviously, to paranormal and felt weird things, but I also had this numbers thing, which there's a name for it, but I don't remember. Basically, I had random numbers pop in my head, and they would not go away for days sometimes until either I figured out why or sometimes they would just go away.
Yeah.
They usually, and it's not like the movie. I forgot what the movie's called. It's not like that. It's not where I see the number everywhere I look. It's like I have a number pop in my head and it means something, but I don't know what. So, for example, when I was married to my first husband, we were getting ready to watch a Super Bowl and his team was the Packers and they were playing in Super Bowl. So this is like mid 2000s. And I had the number, I don't remember the exact score anymore. So it was like 41 or 43 pop in my head, like 20 minutes before the game even started, and it didn't go away. And so if it really means something that I should be able to decipher, it gets really strong. Like it really bothers me that it's there. It's very obvious, I guess. So I finally turned to him, and he already knows I have this weird number thing and some empathy. And his brother and sister-in-law are there too. And I was like, didn't want to look stupid by saying, hey, this number means something, because I'm not always right what it means. So I finally turned to them and I go, right as the game starting, I'm like, dude, Packers are going to win at 41. And like, as soon as I said it, then the number like chilled out in my head. And I'm like, thank God. So we watched the whole game and they win at exactly 41. And his brother and sister-in-law turned to me and they're like, why the heck didn't you bet on that? And I'm like, well, I'm not always right. They're like, you could have won so much money. And I was like, true, but we could have lost a lot of money if I was wrong. So there's that. And then the other thing was I was about 14, 15, and I had a boyfriend. And we were going to a movie. My mom was going to run errands while we went to this movie, and then we were going to meet back at my house. And we're almost to the movie theater, and I just have this overwhelming feeling of dread and that I need to go home. So I finally turned to him because I had not had this kind of a feeling before. And I'm like, I need to go back home. And of course, he was really frustrated with me. Like, are you just trying to ditch me? And I'm like, no, I have a really bad feeling we need to go back. So he finally turned around and took me back home. And my grandma's car, we had a circular driveway. My grandma's car was in the driveway and she didn't drive anymore because she couldn't see very well. So that was odd when we pulled up. Then when I went inside, my grandma was holding my mom on the couch while she cried. And I was like, what happened? And I guess my mom was at a stoplight And the car behind her didn't notice she had stopped and went 45 miles an hour into the back of her at a red light and threw her into the intersection where she got hit by a
Wow.
couple other cars. She walked away with only scrapes and scratches, but her car was totaled. So that was kind of the one that got me more paying attention to things. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not always right. I am not like 80% right, 20% wrong. Or I just don't know what it means on the 20% and I just guess wrong. I don't know. But there's definitely things there. I do not think I'm psychic because I'm not always right. But there's definitely things, and the paranormal is way stronger than anything else for me than guessing somebody's accidents or anything.
Yeah. I've had a few things similar to me happen over the years as far as getting bad feelings about events and stuff like that. I think the 20% that you're wrong, I think it's just like you were saying, you just interpret it wrong. And it's not an exact thing. And, even paying attention to it over, the past, 20, 25 years for me, yeah, I'm not always right about situations and things. But I think that it's just an interpretation. You're feeling all this energy, you're having these feelings, and you got to figure out what they are. And so, sometimes you're not right.
So you did tell me, I'm a little curious. I know technically you're supposed to be interviewing me, but you
Oh, that's fine.
said that you were an EMT, and I
Yes,
obviously wrote a book about that stuff. So have you had any paranormal experiences on the job?
I have. I've had a
Ooh,
few.
okay.
Yeah.
I am intrigued.
Yeah. One of the ones I've shared on a couple other shows that I've guested on is probably the most prevalent experience. Back when I was 18, I became a nurse tech and I worked nursing homes. And I was working night shift at a nursing home. And the end of the building I worked in was an Alzheimer's lockdown unit. And you have to put a code in the keypad or, have a card to swipe in and out to open the doors. And it was just me, a nurse, and another tech. It was about 3:00 in the morning. And I was in the part of the building that was built like in the late 30s, early 40s. It had always been a nursing home. So there's no telling how many people have died there in that part of the building.
Yeah.
And I think we had like 30 something patients. And the rooms were what they call ward rooms. And so what a ward room was, when you go to a hospital and stuff now, you think, all the rooms are private or there's 2 beds in each room. Well, a ward room, there was multiple beds on both sides. So when you walk in this big open room, we had 2 beds on each side. So there's 4 patients in one big giant room and there's a bathroom in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So the nurse and the other tech went on their lunch break, and it's about 3:30 in the morning. And I'm just, everybody's asleep. All the patients are asleep. I'm just there in case somebody needs something or I hear somebody get up. So I walk up to this T in the hallway and I look to my left, just checking. And it looks like one of those old creepy horror movies in the hospital or the nursing home where there's only one light on in the whole hallway. And it's this big, long, dark hallway.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it was. Yeah, because all the patients are asleep. So I walk up to this T in the hallway and look to my left, and I see a tall, skinny, younger man in a all black suit standing at the end of the hallway.
Weird.
And as I look at him, he smiles at me, and he turns left and goes into this room where these 4 patients are. And I'm like, what in the world? So I turn and I walk down that hallway because we shouldn't have any visitors in there, and so there shouldn't be anybody else there. So I walk down there and I walk into the room and I flip the light on and there's nobody there. All 4 of the patients in the room were females and they were older females. And there's nobody in that room except for them.
Yeah.
And they're in the bed. So then I got off at 7:00 the next morning. I thought it was weird. I told the nurse and I told the other tech and they're like, that we've heard all these stories about this side of the building being haunted and that type of stuff. So I come in the next night and I found out that one of the patients in that room had passed away about an hour or 2 after I left work that morning.
Oh, so maybe somebody was collecting them or something? You think that?
Yeah, so I've always called it the angel of death because I didn't know what else to call it. But it wasn't creepy and I wasn't scared. I walked, right straight down there because I was like, nobody should be in the building on this side of the building. And, but yeah, he wasn't creepy. He was a younger guy. He was really sharply dressed in a black suit, very tall, probably 6'4", 6'5", really tall and skinny. And he just smiled at me. And it wasn't a creepy smile. It was just a normal smile, like, hey, you see me, type deal. And he just turned and walked in that room. And I saw him for probably 10 seconds.
Here's the paranormal romantic in me. So she was older, right? Probably like 80s or so. or not quite that
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
Okay. So possibly maybe he was somebody that she was in love with who went to the war and passed away and came back to collect her. So maybe it wasn't the angel of death. Maybe it was her long lost love.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons, yeah.
You're like,
And one of
no.
well, the only reason I would say no is because we had a patient that was in a different room who it was just well known throughout the staff. It was just something that was known. This lady had been there for quite a few years, and she was still verbal Alzheimer's dementia patient,
Yeah.
but you really couldn't have a conversation with her. And she would just basically, if you ask her a question, she'd answer yes or no. And she was pretty much bedbound. But whenever she would start talking about the man in the corner, and these were the only full sentences she would ever say, but she would start talking about the man in the corner, we knew somebody was going to die on the hallway. One patient in that hallway was going to die within 24 hours. And it was like clockwork. If she started talking about that, we were all like, oh, well, I wonder who it's going to be, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's the only reason that I went to the angel of death thing, was because we had this lady who always saw a man in the corner, and she wasn't scared of him or anything. She didn't act like she was scared. She just talked about the man in the corner. And if people didn't die, after that, then we just thought, maybe she was hallucinating or something. But
Yeah, because you tend to do that with dementia.
yeah. And so that's kind of why I went to the angel of death, because maybe we kind of talked about it and thought, well, maybe that's the guy that she's seeing. And I happened to actually see him in physical form.
Yeah.
And that building was, that part of the building I worked in was separated from the rest of the newer part of the nursing home by a big open dining room. And then also physical therapy and like the offices were between us and the rest of the building. And the doors would lock. Like I said, you had to have a code or a card to get in. And we would hear the big double doors, like metal double doors, opening and closing throughout the night. And we would wait for like one of the other nurses or tech to come down for whatever reason to come through our door. And nobody would ever come in there. Or we'd hear people talking on the other side of the double doors from where we were at, and nobody would ever be there. Or you heard footsteps and that type of stuff. And then there were a few times where I was walking around. I mean, I worked there at night, and so I wasn't afraid of the place because I was used to it. But there were a few times where I did get that feeling like somebody was following me or I was being watched, that type, walking down the dark hallway at night.
Yeah.
That was an interesting place to work for sure.
That sounds really creepy. I wrote a story similar to that, sort of. Another person had an experience. I believe it's in my Haunted Hospitals book, but she was a dementia patient, and she kept mentioning a guy by name, that he was in the room with her, and they thought she was just hallucinating. After a while, another lady freaked out. Apparently, the spirit of her husband was hanging around, but he had gone in the room opposite hers, and another lady was freaking out, and everybody went in there to figure out, calm her down, because she didn't have dementia. And they're like, what's wrong? And she's like, there's a man in the corner, and they're like, ask him his name. And his name was the same as the lady's husband.
Oh,
and
wow.
So they had thought that the lady with dementia was just, she was nearing the end, sort of. And then the lady across the hall who had just come in, who was not mentally, anything wrong with her, was freaking out. And she's like, tell him to leave my room. I don't want him in here. And the lady who had dementia would like scoot over on the bed and like pat the bed and be like, he's going to sit next to me. And then on one occasion, one of the nurses walked by the room and saw the older lady with dementia dancing, but for a split second, she saw her dancing with somebody. So then she backtracked her steps and looked in, and then no one was dancing with her. And that kind of freaked her out. And then about a week later, the lady passed away. So they think that he came to take her with him, but hung around for a little bit. So I don't know, she wasn't so alone the last week or so of everything. But so when you were saying that, like in the corner, I thought of when the guy was like hanging out in the other room with the other lady. I was like, and the lady had dementia. I was like, wow, that's kind of weird that, he had a story about a dementia patient too. But anyway, so that's cool. So EMT, did you just do like the, nursing homes, or were you a paramedic too, or no?
Yeah, I was a medic on the ambulance and then the ER. So when I first started out in medicine, I worked for 5 years as a nurse tech. And then for 14 years, I was on the ambulance and in the ER, kind of bounced back and forth between the two. So I've worked trauma and all that stuff.
Did you guys have any paranormal calls when you were on the ambulance or anything weird?
I never had anything on the ambulance other than weird, like high strangeness stuff of people who should have died that didn't, and people that shouldn't have died who did. That type of stuff. Just thoughts to myself of, well, okay, well, this person had a car wreck at 10 miles an hour and it killed them, but this person just had a car wreck at 90 miles an hour in interstate and they walk away with scratches and bruises. And a lot of stuff like that. And I know a lot of my EMS friends, my medic friends have same stories like that. You'd also get people that came into the ER when I worked trauma with gunshots and stab wounds and stuff, that you would get people to come in the ER with gunshots, and somehow, it missed some vital organ or vital blood vessel by, a hair. And if it would have been, the bullet would have been a hair over, they would have been dead. And so just things like that, and seeing things like that on a regular basis, not just one or two patients, but happening all the time, was very interesting. And then also dealing with people dying in the ER and being part of the team that's doing CPR and trying to bring these people back. There's this weird, it's hard to explain unless you've experienced it yourself. And I've talked to this about with other like ER nurses that I know and other medics that have worked in the ER or even in the ambulance. The air is different when they're gone. And even like the doctors feel it. They won't verbalize it as much because most doctors are very scientifically minded and don't kind of dive into the paranormal stuff. But when they call it, everybody just kind of knows because there's just like this emptiness in the room that wasn't there when the patient was alive. So it's a very weird experience.
My hubby's mom is a chaplain. She would deal with that all the time as a chaplain. She would come in when people were dying, and she said for sure, and she's very high, like, I don't want to say that Mormons don't believe in ghosts, but she's very highly Mormon. And she's like, there has to be something after because I feel the spirits leaving when they do. And she's like, it's a very overwhelming thing to be a part of.
Yeah.
She's like, it's easier when they're in a lot of pain because you can feel the air change in the room when they're gone. And you're just kind of like, okay, they're not hurting anymore. But, sometimes it's really sad because it's kind of a tragic end before, they've had a full life. But I couldn't imagine having to do that. It'd be so hard. I wanted to be a doctor. And then I realized I couldn't handle blood. And I was like, well, I'd be a really crappy doctor then because people would die. So I guess I'll just watch true crime on TV.
Yeah. I was reading your book about police, fire, and EMS. And the police stories, because they are very matter of fact and very credible for the most part, police officers are. And so to have them to recount their stories in your book about, the different phantom 911 calls and that type stuff, it just intrigues me. So how hard was it to track down those stories and to get them to tell the stories? Because I know in EMS and in medicine, most people are pretty tight-lipped about paranormal stuff and anything that happens to them.
Well, and it's difficult too because it depends on different circumstances. Like especially in medical, there's like HIPAA and all that stuff. So there's only so much they can say about certain things, especially if the patient is still alive. So I guess the hospital's book was a little bit more difficult. It wasn't too difficult. So I went on Reddit and I posted and asked for stories, which is something you should try later. I'm still kind of fairly new to it, but I had a lot of people respond to me that they had stories and I didn't really put them on there. Some of them were just like contact me directly, but I found that they were actually a lot of people who reached out to me. And then after I did publish the book, I had more people reach out to me too. I had some 911 dispatchers. One of them actually reviewed my book and she was like, this is amazing. You even use all the codes that they use with the police and dispatch. And she's like, you really help explain what our daily jobs are while you're telling what happened. And so that she's like, if I wasn't in the position I was in, I would easily be able to understand how their daily life was in their career. So she is actually a 911 dispatcher and her husband is a cop. And she'd reached out to me and told me that they had both had crazy experiences and they really liked it because she felt less alone. that there are other people who get creepy calls.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure you get creepy calls already. They just might not be paranormal. So, but yeah, no, it's not that hard. Like Reddit is a really good place if you're looking for information. There's a lot of groups on it. I'm still kind of new to it and learning how to, get around and post a lot on there. But I mean, just being a newbie, I had a lot of responses, and that's actually helped me a lot with the second book that I'm almost done with.
Yeah, and reading true ghost stories of first responders, I was actually, before we started the interview and I started talking to you, I was wondering if you had ever worked as a first responder because of the way that it's written. Because there's some things in there that, as a first responder, I can read into a little more than just like the layperson who's never worked in that field. But you do lay it out to where even like a normal person can understand it. But I can just read a little more. I guess just knowing the situations, I can kind of picture it better in my head when you have like a medic on there you're talking about, being on a one of the stories that kind of caught my attention was the medic and his partner who responded to a car wreck, and they saw the apparition of the man that they just pronounced dead standing in the tree line. Yeah. And I can just, like, in my head, I can picture the entire scene because I've been there, been on those scenes and stuff. But it's just the way that the scenes are described is done really, really well with that. And yeah, so it had me wondering if you had ever been a first responder because of the way that all the way it's written.
No, I really wanted to be. But then again, I even actually almost secondarily went into veterinary, and I was still kind of like, well, they still bleed and they're still guts. So,
yeah.
But I also really love animals. So I wish I kind of had just tried to, I'm sure after a while you get desensitized to it. So I probably should have gone on with that because I really wanted to help, but no, I guess this is my way of kind of being able to do something without doing it, I guess.
Right.
I feel like I'm giving people voices, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, being an empath, though, the paranormal just kind of took over the last couple years. It's just kind of what it is. So I have to take breaks, though, because I notice if I write, because I write in my home, and if I'm dwelling on a lot of it, I'm sure from your experiences, that if you tend to live it and breathe it a lot, things get active.
Yeah.
So my house gets more active when I'm really writing a lot or watching a lot of shows. So I have to kind of take breaks.
So you have a new book coming out in May called Supernatural 911 Calls.
I do. I actually have a couple. That's my favorite genre I'm doing right now. But yeah, that one it still has a couple more stories from firefighters, because the first book, I don't think I really had any from the firefighters in that one. I was able to, those were harder to reach out to, but I got some for the second book. And then there's EMT ones and police ones. And then I believe there's one or two hospital ones in there too, but mostly because they were EMTs that worked at the hospital as well. So it's going to have, I think the other one only had like 20 chapters. I think this one's going to have like 25 or 28. I'm trying to make it a lot longer.
Yeah. So what other books do you have coming out here soon?
Real Ghost Stories, Southern Hauntings is going to be coming out this month. And then I mostly wrote true ghost story anthologies, and then after a while I was like, well, I wanted to write fiction. So this year I released a couple of fictional haunted house books, and I released The Haunting of Hartley House in January, and I'll be releasing the sequel this month too to Hartley House. It's called Hartley House Homecoming. So I've been busy.
Yeah, with all the podcasts and all the books. Yeah, you're very busy. And like I said, everybody can find your books on Amazon or at your website. And also they can find your podcasts. I'm sure you're on all the major platforms where people listen to podcasts. You're listening to this, they can find your podcast or listen to this show.
Yeah.
On the 4 different shows you have, most of those are you tell some of the stories from the books as well as other stories.
Yes. On Forever Haunted, we do True Story Tuesdays, and we usually do 2 to 3 stories every Tuesday. And then James and I will banter about the stories in between them. And he's sarcastically funny. So that's a joy.
And if people want to get a hold of you to maybe give you a story, what would be the best way to contact you?
Eve S. Evans author at gmail.com or Eve S. Evans author on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today and chatting. I've had a good time.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As always, stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And don't forget to like, review, rate, and share with all your friends. Thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. Listen to our theme song and more of his music at chrislipsmusic.com. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.